conflict. Quite a number of the international news representation have left for one reason or another, and it's actually a relatively small number now, probably, as I say, less than 100. We are scattered around the city. We work under the guidance and restrictions, put it that way, of the Iraqi authorities. But in fact, they have a fairly easygoing and quite realistic relationship with the Western media, and it's one of the features of life here and reporting from here.
Ian, just to update our viewers, we're just hearing that a US official has confirmed that a major air war has begun against Iraq. Obviously, at the moment, you've got no real evidence of that, but that would be alarming, obviously, for yourselves and for all those residents in Baghdad, that the US official says that a major air war has begun against Iraq.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, as I say, I'm standing on a high-rise building looking out over the city, and it's absolutely peaceful and calm now. The entire city's lit up. There's not a star in the sky, let alone a bullet, tracer shell, missile or anything else, and no evidence of the smoke or explosions of previous nights. It's calm. There's traffic running down a boulevard alongside the river Tigris below me. So I can only imagine that these impacts are further afield.
Indeed, in fact, we're just hearing from Al Jazeera television that there have been airstrikes carried out on the northern Iraqi city of Mosul. So that would explain why you in Baghdad are not receiving any of that airstrikes, because the Al Jazeera television is saying that the airstrikes are being carried out on Mosul, which is the northern Iraqi city.
Yes, exactly. That is more than approximately 150 miles from here. So clearly, I'd have no evidence of that. It's quite possible that we will see or hear some kind of attack on Baghdad later tonight. It's been running now for 2 nights, and it's quite possible that something else will happen later this evening. But at the moment, it's entirely calm here.
OK, Ian, just for the moment, we'll break, because I'm just going to remind viewers who are just joining us here on the ITV News channel that there has been an aerial attack over Baghdad this evening. You're seeing live pictures of a very peaceful-looking Baghdad at the moment, but earlier, anti-aircraft fire lit up the skies above the Iraqi capital. The Pentagon is saying that the so-called shock and awe...
All right, I want to break away from the coverage from the British television station ITN. They have a reporter in Baghdad. Ian Glover-James was reporting that from his vantage point, he was seeing calm in Baghdad. From the cameras, the pictures that we had seen, anything but calm in other parts of the huge city of about 5 million people in Baghdad. I want to recap to our viewers who may just be tuning in what has happened in the past 45 minutes or hour or so. CNN has confirmed the start of A-Day, the start of the aerial bombardment, the massive U.S. airstrike campaign that has been dubbed Shock and Awe, a campaign that was expected to last at least 24 to 48 hours. Iraqi anti-aircraft fire was firing almost randomly, wildly into the skies, hoping to shoot down U.S. planes, U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles. There's no indication any of that happened. We have been reporting huge explosions have occurred in the outskirts of Baghdad, presumably explosions resulting from U.S. bombs, U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles, and other sophisticated munitions. CNN's Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr is standing by at the Pentagon. Barbara?
Wolf, as this begins to unfold over the next minutes and hours, we are told to expect to see virtually all of the assets of the U.S. Air Force and Navy come into play here. The Air Force has B-52s in the air. Officials are now confirming. Expect to see the B-2 stealth bomber playing a role in this campaign, as well as Navy carrier-based aircraft flying from the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf. Tomahawk cruise missiles being launched from Navy submarines and surface ships, possibly even being launched by the British. In the previous 2 nights of bombings, the British did participate. They can fire Tomahawk missiles from their submarines in the Royal Navy, so we are likely to see some coalition involvement as well. We have continued, as you've pointed out, over the last several minutes to see some additional anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad. Clearly the Iraqis searching the skies for those incoming planes and missiles, hoping if they put up a wall of enough fire, anti-aircraft fire, they will hit something. So we're sort of standing here watching, all looking at the same picture, hearing the occasional air raid sirens over Baghdad, waiting for things to unfold, Wolf.
Barbara, is there any indication whatsoever that this is an improvised shock and awe strategy that might be unfolding, or is it the original game plan that they had in mind from the start?
Well, Pentagon officials and military officials have continued to say the plan remains flexible, open to change. There's things that they can do along the way. Hard to say whether this was the original plan. There was always some flexibility built in if Saddam Hussein decided to go into exile, if he decided to give up, if the Iraqi military deposed him by a coup, if one of these events had occurred that had taken Saddam Hussein out of power, if there had been regime change and then voluntary disarmament, it's clear the campaign would have unfolded somewhat differently. But over the last several hours, as this has begun to sort itself out, it appears there's no real indication just yet that Saddam Hussein is willing to go into exile, willing to give up the reins of power. So we have every indication that they plan to proceed with an aerial bombardment of Baghdad. Whether it's the exact shock and awe first anticipated, of course, no one really knows.
All right, Barbara, stand by at the Pentagon. Our national security correspondent, David Ensor, has some new information that he wants to report. David?
Well, Wolf, a senior intelligence official is telling us that they are convinced that Saddam Hussein was there when the bombs were dropping, along with one or more of his sons, in the Baghdad residential compound that the U.S. hit early Thursday. Officials saying they do not know yet whether the Iraqi leader was injured or killed in the massive attack, and acknowledging the information is mixed. One, in fact, saying to me that he's seen intelligence suggesting he's dead, intelligence suggesting he's injured, and intelligence suggesting he's just fine. As he put it, welcome to the fog of war. At the same time, intelligence officials are saying that there has been a marked reduction in the kind of communications that you would expect there to be at the high level of the Iraqi military and leadership over the last 48 hours, suggesting disarray, suggesting that the initial attack has at least caused confusion amongst Saddam Hussein and his leaders, if it hasn't actually killed him. So that may be why there was the delay that we have, at least up until just now, seen in the aerial bombardment campaign, as the U.S. sought through various private and secret sometimes means, through emails and other means as well, to talk to the military commanders, try to convince them to basically lay down their arms. Wolf?
And presumably, David, this start of an intensive aerial campaign might precisely have that objective in mind, to try to convince what remains of an Iraqi leadership, as you say, perhaps in disarray, to lay down their guns, to lay down their arms, and surrender. I would assume that would be one of the objectives. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Absolutely. We may see leadership targets hit with greater emphasis than any others in this initial strike. I should also tell you that a technical analysis of the tape that was put on the air of Saddam Hussein talking, that was broadcast hours after the first attack by the U.S., officials now saying they think that is the voice of Saddam Hussein on the tape. They, however, know, the U.S. knows that the Iraqi leader taped a number of messages in advance of the war. So over at the CIA, they're now trying to ascertain whether the televised message, could have been one of those taped ahead messages. It did, of course, mention the U.S. attack being on March 20th and starting during morning prayers, but there could have been a number of different messages pre-taped, and this could have been one of them. So a lot of theories, and as I say, the fog of war reigns. Wolf?
All right, David Ensor with important information. We'll be standing by, getting back to you as well. Our Bob Franken is in northern Kuwait at an air base. He's monitoring these developments. Bob, you were saying intense air activity at the base where you're located, not far from the Iraqi border.
Well, it's interesting, as a matter of fact. It has been something that has grown in intensity, and I wanted to supplement a couple of points that you've discussed with some of the others who have been on. First of all, the idea about an evolving battle plan. You were talking about that with Barbara Starr. The wing commander here this morning pointed out that although there was a plan, the plan, so to speak, that had been developed, it was one that by the very nature of war was changing constantly depending on the battlefield realities and depending to some degree on the psychological realities. One of the reasons that we get the feeling that we have been allowed to be here to show all the noise, all the chaos, all the intensity of the planes taking off is that it is so close to Iraq. It is going to be a message to the people in Iraq and to the leaders of Iraq from the United States government, hey, right on your doorstep, you're about to be clobbered by a huge and growingly intense air campaign, and it's going to be on television for you to see as it streaks your way. And that, of course, is exactly what we are seeing as the planes take off and land. The number of them has grown over the last several days and promises to grow through the night.
One of many bases the U.S. and the British Air Forces are using right now to go after targets. The U.S. Navy also involved. You see some live pictures. These tracer fire, these are Iraqi anti-aircraft firing into the skies, hoping to shoot down U.S. planes or cruise missiles. CNN's Martin Savage is already in Iraq. He's in southern Iraq. He's one of the journalists embedded with U.S. troops. Marty, what are you seeing now?
Well, we're the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and obviously the big effort as far as coming into southern Iraq was to focus on the oil industry. That is considered crucial, not from what many people have criticized and said was the United States wanting to grab oil. The military leaders say that is not the plan at all. It is to get the infrastructure of oil, which is so valuable to this nation and to so many other nations in the Gulf region, and get it back into the hands of the Iraqi people, where they say it has not been under their control. It's been under the control to make Saddam Hussein richer. So there was a very big push into southern Iraq for that purpose. And specifically where we are, which is just outside of Basra, at this particular facility, which we cannot name because it still could come under attack from Iraqi artillery or Scud missiles, it's estimated that 14% of the entire world's oil supply flows through this region. But they were very concerned in the days leading up and planning this assault on this facility that it had been targeted for destruction. In other words, that it may have been booby-trapped or that there had been explosives already laid. And there was a great deal of concern that if they did not race and get through with some element of surprise, that the whole thing could have been blown up. That would have been an economic disaster, would have been an ecological disaster. And had it gone up when the Marines were arriving, it also could have meant a great deal as far as loss of life. As it was, that was not the case. It got here in time. It had not been detonated. No Marines were injured or killed in the assault here. There was a brief firefight, and there are about 50 people that were taken into custody, including about 25 that are considered EPOWs or prisoners of war. One officer here clarified it and said pretty much this was a crown jewel in the early opening effort of the Gulf War, because now the revenues that will eventually come from this facility will help rebuild the nation after the war is over. Wolf?
All right, Martin Savage, CNN's Martin Savage, he's with U.S. troops in the southern part of Iraq. We are now getting reports that there have been huge explosions, as they're being called, not only in Baghdad, in the outskirts of Baghdad, but in other major urban centers of Iraq, specifically Kirkuk and Mosul. We have a reporter in the northern part of Iraq, Ben Wiedemann. Ben, what are you seeing and what are you hearing from your location?
Yeah, well, for beginning about 15 minutes ago, we started seeing a tracer fire rising from the horizon over Mosul, which is about 28 miles to the west of where we are. It's been pretty sporadic. Okay, now I see one tracer round. We saw also some flashes on the horizon. It appears to be coming from both the direction of Mosul and also a bit north of it. And this is really a continuation of what we were seeing this morning in the early hours of the morning, about 4:30 local time, when the first bombings actually began over Mosul. 3 separate incidents in the morning, and now this evening, for the past 15 minutes or so, we've been seeing sporadic tracer fire. Wolf?
All right, Ben Wiedemann, stand by. We're going to get back to you again. Once again, Mosul in the northern part of Iraq under fire, presumably by U.S. warplanes and cruise missiles. Kirkuk as well. And you're looking at these live pictures of Baghdad, where Iraqi anti-aircraft fire continues to fire into the skies, hoping to shoot down a U.S. plane. There have been huge explosions on the outskirts of Baghdad as well. We're standing by in about a half an hour from now. We're expecting a Pentagon briefing. The Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Richard Myers, will be briefing reporters, presumably telling us more about what we're seeing on our television screens right now. Kevin Seitz is also in northern Iraq. Kevin, tell us what you're seeing and what you're hearing. First of all, where precisely are you?
Wolf, Sham Shamal. It is the last city in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. Kirkuk is just about 40 kilometers from us. And about 5 minutes ago, we started to see flashes in that northern horizon. And then shortly after that, anti-aircraft fire. Now, that's continued for the last 10 minutes. And the sky over Kirkuk has been kind of glowing red for a while. Now, it's settled down for a bit. There seems to be a lull right now. But the actual anti-aircraft fire was fairly heavy for about 5 minutes there. And it looks like the battle for Kirkuk, the long-reported battle, has finally begun.
And Kirkuk, Mosul, these are key cities, key Iraqi cities, which have enormous wealth. The Iraqi Revolutionary Guard, Iraqi military forces had complete control, but clearly U.S. Targets going after these positions. What about what else are you seeing, Kevin, that you can share with us right now?
Well, this has been a fairly active border post, Wolf. There's been some mortar fire here today, and this is one of the areas that people thought might capitulate fairly quickly and open up as some of these Iraqi troops fell back to actually defend Kirkuk. The troops are still dug in on this, and you hear some some Russian-made machine gun fire up in the hills, but it has mostly been anti-aircraft fire. Flashes coming from over that horizon, and this is a fairly good distance away. Like I said, this is 40 kilometers away, and so to see from here, there's obviously some very strong firepower going into that city right now.
Intense bombardment underway in several locations now.
We're starting to hear it again.
Tell us what you're hearing, Kevin.
Well, we're starting to hear anti-aircraft fire again coming from there. It looks like some of the glowing in the sky that we saw earlier has fallen off quite a bit, but there's still some sounds of anti-aircraft fire in that region. And again, like I said, it's pretty far away. Some Dushka machine gun fire coming from the hills around us. All seeming to go in that direction.
He's in northern Iraq with Kevin's in northern Iraq, where there's also U.S. airstrikes underway. Kirkuk, Mosul, and Baghdad. You're looking at these live pictures of Baghdad earlier. Huge explosions heard on the outskirts of Baghdad. CNN's senior Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre has got some more information. Jamie?
Well, Wolf, at this point, the senior Pentagon officials are telling us this is their so-called A-Day. That is the day they plan for the massive air assault of Baghdad and other parts of Iraq. But they're also at the same time warning us that this plan is very flexible and can be calibrated to deal with events on the ground. It's not an automatic launching of all 3,000 or so precision-guided munitions. We're told at this point that the plan does involve carrier aircraft from both carriers in the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf to drop precision-guided bombs. In addition, we're told that cruise missiles will be part of the activity today, and also B-2 stealth bombers with their capacity to hit 16 individual targets with satellite-guided bombs, and B-2 bombers, some of which took off from Fairford, England, hours ago, will also be taking part, perhaps launching either air-launched cruise missiles. It's expected they would launch air-launched cruise missiles at the beginning of the campaign. So we'll just have to watch and see how this unfolds. But this is the day that the Pentagon hoped to instill, quote, shock and awe on the Iraqi military in order to facilitate its desire to surrender. Wolf?
And the reason they call it A-Day as opposed to D-Day, Jamie?
You know, I'm not really sure. I'm thinking that A might be for attack or perhaps the air part of the campaign. Clearly, it wasn't the beginning of the war because it started some, 2 days ago. But at this point, this is the beginning of this massive aerial campaign. So I'm guessing it's something like that.
All right, listen to this, Jamie. These are shots being fired now in Baghdad. I want our viewers to listen in.
Okay. All right, I didn't say it.
So there you see it. You just saw it. You just heard it. Approximately 5 to 8 minutes of an intense airstrike against targets in Baghdad. Remember, this is a city of 5 million people. We can only imagine what terrifying state most of those people are presumably in right now as they see this huge, huge round of airstrikes going after selected targets in and around Baghdad. We have no idea the extent of the casualties, no idea the extent of the destruction. What we have seen on television, though, is indeed the first phase of A-Day, the campaign called Shock and Awe by the U.S. military. Watching all of this, listening to all of this with us, General Don Shepard, our military analyst. I think it's fair to say in the 30 years that I've been covering these kinds of stories, General Shepard, I've never seen anything like this, of this kind of magnitude, on live television. Certainly not on live television, maybe not even on not live television.
Wolf, let me make some points to you. As we are looking at this through soda straws, it looks like this is bombing of downtown Baghdad. That is not what is going on. These bombs are confined to the military area of Baghdad as far as I'm watching here. Now there may be selected targets that are command and control leadership buried targets hit in downtown Baghdad. But it's apparent to me from watching this that what I've seen is JDAM bombs, the satellite guided bombs dropped by B-2s. I could tell that from the strings and how they impacted. I also would estimate that the 117 stealth fighters were involved. I saw a tremendous amount of anti-aircraft fire, directed sector fire, but I saw no tracking fire, indicating to me that they were not seeing things on their radar, but it was disciplined fire. So they do have the ability to command and control their air defense by talking. They tell them when to fire and where to fire because they're covering sectors. Then a sector goes down, they cover another sector. Further, I saw a launch of SA-2 and SA-3 missiles. It doesn't mean they saw anything on their radar, but it means that they might have thought they saw something on their radar. What you have watched is probably strikes by Tomahawk missiles, by conventional air-launched cruise missiles launched from B-52s from standoff range, laser and satellite-guided bombs from F-117s and B-2s. And I will make another point. Notice the lights are still on. This is not meant to destroy Baghdad or destroy infrastructure. You did not hit electrical power plants, transformers, that type of thing. The lights are still on basically everywhere. So they're going against specific targets.
General Shepard. General Shepard, hold on one second. I want our viewers to absorb what they've just seen, this powerful blast right here.
Sustained and massive attack on the center of Baghdad that we have seen in this entire brief war. There's no less than 5 or 6 major buildings that are now in flames. The entire city center has been shaking with massive explosions. Several buildings are on fire. There are plumes of dark smoke going into the night sky. To repeat, 5 or 6 at least major targets. Huge high-rise buildings. At least one, I believe, is one of the presidential palaces. Several must be government ministries. They're in that district of the city. At least 20 or 30% of the night sky, that's my rough estimate, is now full of thick, dark smoke. I can see 2 or 3 high-rise buildings ablaze. The intensity of the explosions has been absolutely huge. The high-rise hotel that I'm in has been shaking, the windows cracking. There have been thunder flashes, followed a few seconds later by massive reverberations of sound that has made one duck onto one's knees below balconies. It's been quite a frightening exhibit of firepower. Nothing at all has been visible in the sky. No sign of an aircraft, no sign of a missile. The only visible sign of anything happening in the heavens above us that are a beautiful dark blue color has been the constant ack-ack fire, the AAA in yellow, pink and red, as the Iraqi gunners try and find the targets of what is raining down on the city center tonight. I can't stress how the scale of this attack is considerably higher than anything we've seen before.
So this is then the shock and awe that the Pentagon was threatening.
All right, We were just listening to Ian Glover James. He's a reporter in Baghdad for ITV, the television news channel in Britain, with an eyewitness account. Let's get some more eyewitness account of what we have just seen. Mike Wilson's with the New York Times. He's just outside Baghdad. Mike?
Yeah, I'm actually well south of Baghdad. We just crossed the Kuwaiti border about 6 hours ago, moving fairly slowly. But you can see where a lot of these missiles are being launched from here, from the area that we're in now. I'm not exactly sure. We just stopped for fuel. I'm with the Marine Division, but the missiles shooting up into the sky are amazing, as well as these glows in the distance that may be oil fields. There's been some speculation that the oil fields are burning here, but we haven't gotten close enough to see one yet.
But you could clearly feel it. You could clearly see it. Mike Wilson, we'll be getting back to you from the New York Times. Kevin Seitz, our reporter in the northern part of Iraq. Remember, what we have just seen here on live television, here on CNN, these bomb blasts in Baghdad, only part of the story. Similar activity going on in Mosul, in Kirkuk. Kevin Seitz is up in the northern part of Iraq. Kevin, what are you seeing and hearing?
Well, there seems to be a simultaneous attack. About 10 minutes ago, it had been all quiet here, and all of a sudden we started hearing major anti-aircraft fire as these bombs started to drop in Kirkuk, which is about 40 kilometers from here. Now, obviously, we wouldn't be able to see anti-aircraft fire in Kirkuk. That's too far away. But there was an Iraqi position just about 2 kilometers from us, and I think that they were frightened that they were going to be under attack next. They began to open fire from here, very close to us. Tracer fires going over our head, also going towards Kirkuk. You could see kind of the red glow over the horizon, that there was some kind of major firepower dropping in that city. Kirkuk, of course, is the oil-rich region that everyone was so concerned about when there were reports from the CIA that Saddam Hussein had planted munitions around those oil fields, possibly going to detonate them like he had after the Gulf War in 1991. So this, again, may be the start of the war for Kirkuk, the battle for Kirkuk here. It seems at this point there is quite a lot of firepower going about 40 kilometers just over our shoulder here.
Kevin Seitz, we're going to be getting back to you. Let me set the scene once again for our viewers. A-Day, that's what the Pentagon is calling it, the start of this massive U.S. air campaign. You're looking at live pictures of Baghdad. Huge areas of Baghdad now in flames as a result of this massive U.S. airstrike, the start of the campaign that's been dubbed Shock and Awe, an air campaign designed to undermine the Iraqi leadership. We're already told by our national security correspondent, David Ensor. Look at that explosion. David Ensor reporting U.S. intelligence learning the Iraqi government now in disarray. Unclear what is happening with Saddam Hussein, what's going on with Saddam Hussein, whether he's alive or dead, in control or not. Jamie McIntyre, our senior Pentagon correspondent, who first reported the start of A-Day, the start of this shock and awe campaign. What are you hearing right now from your listening post, Jamie?
Well, Wolf, I'm in the briefing room here, but CNN's Barbara Starr, my colleague here, informs me that she's been told by a senior defense official that General Tommy Franks was given essentially a 48-hour window to launch this attack at his discretion, based on the conditions he saw at the ground, when he felt the timing would be absolutely right, and so it was left to him within a window of 48 hours. Also, we are confirming now that this was originally designed to be an air campaign, followed quickly by a ground assault, and that was reversed, based in part in concern for the oil fields, the desire to get those troops in on the ground and secure the oil fields in the south and prevent a disaster there. So that was one of the factors that switched the timing. Obviously, this impromptu target of opportunity that occurred on the first night was another. What we're seeing here as we're looking at all these massive explosions in Baghdad is, as we've said, what the Pentagon has nicknamed shock and awe, but the technical name for it is combined effects operations, and it's a very sophisticated, coordinated campaign to hit a series of targets in a specific order and specific places that are designed to greatly magnify the effect that this bombing campaign would have, as opposed to a more indiscriminate campaign. Wolf?
Jamie McIntyre, we're going to be getting back to you, and remember, we're only about 13 minutes away from the start of a Pentagon briefing. The Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers, will be briefing, telling us the specifics of what has been going on. Let's listen in on the coverage now from ITV, the British news channel in London. They have a reporter on the scene, Ian Glover James.
That is where the central offices are. That is where the Ministry of Information is, and that's where our satellite dishes would be to try and get pictures out. But whether it's discriminatory or not, it's not for me to tell at the moment.
Okay, Michael Nicholson in Baghdad, thanks very much for that, and we'll have more from here in Kuwait later in the programme. But for now, let's go back to Katie in London.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well,
all right, that was reporting going on from ITV, the British news channel in London. They have a reporter on the scene in Baghdad. We'll be checking with them in periodically. Let's bring back General Shepard. General Shepard, you heard Jamie McIntyre report that General Tommy Franks, the commander of the Central Command, the U.S. general in charge of putting this war plan together, made some changes in advance for the game of the war plan because of the concern of the oil fields in the southern part of Iraq. That's why U.S. and British military forces went in on the ground before the start of this shock and awe air campaign. We've been speculating about that for the past 48 hours, but now we have official confirmation. General Shepard?
Yeah, Jamie is normally right on, and I think that makes perfect sense to me without having the information that Jamie has. Basically, it makes sense to me that the oil fields, when they start setting them on fire, you need to secure those because of the economy afterwards. We also understand that General Franks was given this 48-hour time frame to his discretion. This, I believe, again, is a warning. It's confined to an area of Baghdad. The targets that are hit, again, are military targets. I observed them repeatedly hitting the same target, indicating to me they're going to try to dig deeper and deeper for buried underground, things that are underground command and control facilities, Wolf. All this is making pretty much as advertised, in my opinion.
And the obvious political goal is a carefully timed strike, not only in Baghdad, but Mosul and Kirkuk. We're hearing explosions that have been going on there. If, in fact, around 1 p.m. Eastern time, which would be 9 p.m. in Baghdad, if the strikes were timed to coincide around 9 p.m., that would be already Friday night after the Muslim Sabbath, which is Friday, the Muslim holy day, and as a result, presumably there would be less political criticism for the U.S. not striking on the Muslim holy day, but in the aftermath of the Muslim holy day ending at sundown. Would that be a consideration in timing this missile strike, the bomb strike, to coincide in simultaneous places around the country around 9 p.m. Baghdad time, General Shepard?
Well, without knowing exactly, Wolf, I suspect that that's one of the things in General Franks' consideration. I'm sure he was briefed on the considerations of that, so it certainly could be one of the factors of timing. I think another thing that drives it is if there's time-sensitive information from a command and control standpoint that leadership is in certain places, that also would drive the timing, but I'm just speculating, Wolf, not sure.
General Shepard, I want to remind our viewers right now that our reporters, our journalists on the scene in Baghdad, 4 of them, Nick Robertson, Reem Brahimi, and our photographer, our producer there, they are fine. They're in Baghdad. They were ordered expelled. They were ordered to leave just a few hours ago by the Iraqi government. We are assured that they are fine. Unfortunately, they can't be reporting for us right now. The Iraqi government shut down the CNN operation in Baghdad just a few hours ago, just before the start of this A-Day, this shock and awe aerial bombardment that we've seen on live television over the past, I'm guessing now, 20-25 minutes or so. And remember, we're only about 5 or 8 minutes away from the scheduled start of the briefing at the Pentagon. General Richard Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. Of course, we'll have live coverage of that. General Shepard, when you see the simultaneous nature of these bombings, I assume the planes have to take off at a certain time, the cruise missiles have to be launched. With the target time, let's say 9 p.m. Baghdad time, 1 p.m. on the east coast of the United States, this is a carefully choreographed airstrike.
Wolf, indeed it is, and I don't mean to be glib about this or make it sound trite, but it really is a symphony that has to be orchestrated by a conductor. The conductor is Lieutenant General Mosley, the air commander, if you will, of the air campaign. He's responsible to General Franks. He is the one that put together the plan. General Franks would approve the plan. The Secretary of Defense would then present it to the President so that it's up and down the loop. But all of these things take off from different air bases, from different ships. They have to go to tankers and refuel. All of it has to be done in a very carefully timed manner so as not to run into each other, not to cause undue effects, conflict between weapons and this type of thing. So you're seeing a very, very carefully planned operation, Wolf.
And we just heard another huge explosion in Baghdad. Let's listen into this one. The bombs apparently still falling, unless that was Iraqi fire, anti-aircraft fire that we were hearing. But we see a lot of smoke, we see a lot of fire coming from various locations in and around Baghdad. We're told similar activity going on elsewhere in Iraq, specifically in Kirkuk and Mosul. We're standing by for that Pentagon briefing. That's about to begin in a few minutes. General Richard Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. CNN's Christiane Amanpour. She was with me here in Kuwait City only a few hours ago. Now, Christiane, I take it you're in southern Iraq. Tell our viewers where you are and what you're doing.
Just on the border here at the British Divisional Field Headquarters. And what's been going on, of course, is much quieter than what you're seeing in Baghdad, but nonetheless significant in terms of securing vital strategic Iraqi economic and commercial targets. They've taken the city of Qasr, which is the main commercial port here, vitally needed. They've got US and British forces trying to secure the Ramallah oil fields, which you guys have been talking a lot about. The significance of that is extremely important. That is the oil field that puts out 60% of Iraq's oil. They also overnight took and consolidated the Four Peninsula, which is where Iraq's oil terminal is and where that gets pumped out to sea and then onto the tankers. There have also been some casualties over here over the last 24 hours. We've been reporting about the helicopter that went down with 12 British and 4 US troops inside. There have also been 2 US Marines killed, one of those in the battle for Qasr, that port just on the other side of the border with northern Kuwait. So a lot of activity down this end, but obviously not as noisy and as dramatic pictures as you're seeing up in Baghdad right now. Wolf?
Christiane, how much resistance are the Iraqi troops in the area where you are with these British forces? How much resistance are the Iraqis demonstrating?
Not much. On the whole, there have been not much resistance, except a little bit in the town of Qasr. They had expected to take that town much earlier today, and it wasn't until later this afternoon that they confirmed the US Marines, also commanded by British 3 Commando here, that they had taken it. But there are some pockets of resistance. However, there are also at least 250 Iraqis that we're told have surrendered, both to US Marines and to British Royal Marines. So there's that situation going on. Not a whole lot of resistance down here. Something interesting, though, about Qasr. Earlier today, the Iraqi information minister and the interior minister appeared on television in a press conference in Baghdad, and they vowed that Qasr would never be taken, that it would be fiercely fought over. Well, it has been taken. There was some resistance. There's still US and British forces down there trying to mop up the last pockets of resistance, but all in all, they have it. And indeed, at one point, the US Marines raised a US flag. They then had to take that down. They were told that was not an appropriate action because they weren't occupying, they were liberating operating, and that's been going on. But all in all, the military command down here is saying that the southern targets have been achieved, and it's going to be up to the British to hold on to those southern targets as the Americans move on up towards Baghdad. We also understand that British forces are outside Basra. They have not gone into Basra. We're being told that they're sort of scouting, reconnoitering the area. In any event, they're quite close to the outskirts of Basra, Iraq's second biggest city. Wolf?
And Christiane, as we stand by in the next few moments to go to the Pentagon and hear a briefing from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Richard Myers, remind our viewers how important Qasr is. Given the fact that so much of Iraq's oil is in the southern part of Iraq, this is the huge port of Iraq, and if it's now under the control of the British forces, U.S. troops in the vicinity, and they're moving towards the next major town, the next major city of Basra, this is quite significant, especially since what Jamie McIntyre is reporting, General Tommy Franks reconsidered the military plan in order to protect those oil fields.
Indeed, Qasr is the main commercial port, and what we were being told by military officials here is that it is vital and strategic, not just for the oil, but mostly, they're saying, for the influx of humanitarian supplies, which British senior defense officials have said they hope to bring that in perhaps even in the next few days. They want to get that up in country. So this port, very, very important, really the only one that Iraq has, this deep water port, the most important commercial port that it has, and now it's in control of U.S. Marines and some of those British forces who are commanding that expedition there. In terms of Basra, again, they're telling us that Basra is not a military target, that they don't intend to sort of assault Basra and try to take it. What they want to do is neutralize any resistance, any Iraqi divisions or units that are around Basra, and then hope that the people of Basra, the citizens of Basra, will welcome and bring Basra into the sphere of influence of the British and other forces down here. The bigger picture here is that they're trying to show that having got the main oil terminal, the main oil wells, and the main oil field in the south, and having Basra on side, as they say, that will send a very stark message to Baghdad that their important southern assets are no longer under their control, and perhaps the British feel give a message to the leadership in Baghdad to finally step aside. That's what they would like.
CNN's Christiane Amanpour, she's with the British forces. They're moving not only having taken control of Qasr together with U.S. Marines, but on the road to Basra, the U.S. Marines and British forces about to attempt to take that important Iraqi city as well. Christiane, stand by. I want to get back to you soon, but Kevin Seitz is in northern Iraq, where a similar round of intense U.S.-led airstrikes has also taken place within the past half hour or so. Kevin, tell our viewers what you're seeing now.
Well, it's been sporadic here. About 15-20 minutes ago, there was some major anti-aircraft fire going up from the Iraqi position about 2 kilometers from us. It was in response to some bombing that was going on about 40 kilometers from here in Kirkuk. It seems that the Iraqis on this position were frightened perhaps that they may be next in this bombing run. Now, the sky behind me has actually turned much lighter. It looks almost like the break of dawn here. You can see some of the light possibly from the fires that may be burning in Kirkuk. There has been a lot of bombing that's been going on there. You can hear some of the secondary explosions. We've heard some Dushka machine gun fire from positions here. So it seems like there's a simultaneous battle going on with the bombing of Baghdad picking up in Kirkuk and in Mosul as well. This is just some major activity going on here tonight.
All right, Kevin, stand by for a second. I want to reset the stage. I want to tell our viewers what's going on, viewers who may just be tuning in the United States, indeed around the world. This has been a critical past hour or so, a carefully coordinated U.S.-led airstrike against selected targets in Baghdad as well as elsewhere. At least we know Mosul and Kirkuk, important facilities. This as the U.S. and British ground war continues in the southern part of Iraq, a ground war moving not only through Qasr but also up towards Basra. Let's take a look at some of the earlier pictures of the huge explosions that rocked Baghdad around 9 p.m. local time, 1 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. Explosions that rocked Baghdad and certainly created the kind of shock and awe the Pentagon has been talking about. We're standing by for a formal Pentagon briefing. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Richard Myers, expected to walk into the Pentagon briefing room very soon and tell us what has just happened from their perspective. Kevin Seitz, go ahead, fill our viewers in a little bit more on what you're seeing right now in the northern part of Iraq, an area that has also seen an intense bombing campaign over the past half hour or so. Kevin Seitz may not be hearing me right now, but
some of the bombing that was going on in Kirkuk. You could see these little red tracers going up in the air, almost like broken lines, and firing towards Kirkuk. The sky behind me, you can't see it very well because we're on video phone. But if I can describe it to you a little bit, it is just almost glowing with kind of a white light. It's the middle of the night here, and yet the whole horizon line is lighting up, and we're about 40 kilometers away, so you can only imagine what that's like as you get closer. Now, the Iraqis that are in this position about 2 kilometers from us are dug in. They have anti-aircraft as well, anti-aircraft guns, and they have been firing them in response to some of the bombing that's going on there. We see the tracer fire going up every once in a while. It's settled down a bit in the last few minutes, but sporadically it seems to be going on back and forth, signifying that there is some major action going on just about 40 kilometers from us.
And Kevin, as you speak, the Reuters news agency is quoting a Reuters journalist on the scene in Baghdad is saying that huge fires are raging in Saddam Hussein's palace in Baghdad, as well as other buildings throughout the city. We can see those fires. We can see what's going on in Baghdad. We obviously are don't have the same kind of access, our cameras, to what's going on in Mosul, Kirkuk, perhaps other cities, other targets around Iraq as well. And even as this air war continues, the ground invasion of southern Iraq moves forward in a very, very fast pace. General Don Shepard, our military analyst, is with us as well. General Shepard, we don't know this for sure, but I'm getting the sense, based on the pictures we're seeing from Baghdad, that perhaps this phase of the air campaign, this initial shock and awe phase, may be over with right now. They're going to assess what has happened, assess what's going on with the Iraqi leadership. We had been hearing reports from our David Ensor that it's in disarray right now, assess what the status of Saddam Hussein is. They'll take a look at the pictures, they'll do the bomb damage assessment before presumably they go into the next phase of the air campaign. General Shepard, what do you think?
I think that's a good guess, Wolf. I also believe that they are looking for other command and control targets or indications of leadership targets from all of their intelligence sources that would lead them to either restrike an area immediately or strike it in another area if it's a moving type target. So I suspect they're looking at all of those things, but it appears to me that this phase, at least right now, is probably over, Wolf.
And if in fact it was designed to I don't know what stronger word to use, to rattle, to unnerve the Iraqi leadership, of course most of whom are in Baghdad, we presumably think that I would assume as just an observer that probably would be accomplished. But one other point, I do want to remind our viewers that Saddam Hussein is from the Iraqi town of Tikrit, and many of his top commanders are Tikritis from that clan in Tikrit. We don't have television cameras there, but presumably that might be an area that the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy might be looking at for sort of targets of opportunity there as well. General Shepard?
I agree that any place that you could find leadership gathered would be a target right now. Again, I don't know what what's going on in Tikrit or in Mosul up there, but if you've got concentrations of military or their leadership, it definitely is going to be a target. And I'd like to make one other point again, that these impacts that we've seen have been in the military and government ministerial area of Baghdad along the Tigris River in downtown Baghdad, confined to that area. The lights in Baghdad are still on, so we'll have to wait and see what comes out of the Pentagon briefing. But this is meant as a message, I believe, and further a message that we have the capability to do this to your forces if the forces continue to fight. That's my assessment, Wolf.
All right, General Shepard, stand by. Here comes Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Richard Myers.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, 4 American Marines and 8 members of the British Armed Forces were killed in a helicopter accident returning from a mission in Iraq. And in a separate incident, a U.S. Marine was killed in action during combat operations in Iraq. We are certainly grateful for their lives, their courage, and their sacrifice, and our hearts go out to their families. The world will be a safer place because of their dedicated service. On the President's order, coalition forces began the ground war to disarm Iraq and liberate the Iraqi people yesterday. And a few minutes ago, the air war in Iraq began. General Myers will provide some details on the progress of our operation, but first let me comment on the aims and objectives we have for the days ahead. Our goal is to defend the American people and to eliminate Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and to liberate the Iraqi people. Coalition military operations are focused on achieving several specific objectives. To end the regime of Saddam Hussein by striking with force on a scope and scale that makes clear to Iraqis that he and his regime are finished. Next, to identify, isolate, and eventually eliminate Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, their delivery systems, production capabilities, and distribution networks. Third, to search for, capture, drive out terrorists who have found safe harbor in Iraq. Fourth, to collect such intelligence as we can find related to terrorist networks in Iraq and beyond. Fifth, to collect such intelligence as we can find related to the global network of illicit weapons of mass destruction activity. Sixth, to end sanctions and to immediately deliver humanitarian relief, food and medicine to the displaced and to the many needy Iraqi citizens. Seventh, to secure Iraq's oil fields and resources which belong to the Iraqi people and which they will need to develop their country after decades of neglect by the Iraqi regime. And last, to help the Iraqi people create the conditions for a rapid transition to a representative self-government that is not a threat to its neighbors and is committed to ensuring the territorial integrity of that country. The regime is starting to lose control of their country. Yesterday, the Iraqi information minister declared that the port of Qasr is completely in our hands, quote unquote. Quote, they, the coalition forces, failed to capture it, unquote. In fact, coalition forces did capture it and do control the port of Qasr and also a growing portion of the country of Iraq. The confusion of Iraqi officials is growing. Their ability to see what is happening on the battlefield, to communicate with their forces, and to control their country is slipping away. They're beginning to realize, I suspect, that the regime is history. And as that realization sets in, their behavior is likely to begin to tip and to change. Those close to Saddam Hussein will likely begin searching for a way to save themselves. Those whose obedience is based on fear may well begin to lose their fear of him. Officers and soldiers in the field will increasingly see that their interests lie not in dying for a doomed regime, but in helping the forces of Iraq's liberation. To those in the Iraqi chain of command, some words of advice. Do not obey regime orders to use weapons of mass destruction. Do not obey orders to use innocent civilians as human shields. Do not follow orders to destroy any more of Iraq's oil wells, or to blow up dams, or to flood villages. Those who carry out such orders will be found and will be punished. We are especially grateful for the direct military involvement of the forces of Great Britain and Australia and Poland and so many other countries. And we are deeply grateful for the support of each of the now 45 nations that have publicly associated themselves with the coalition effort in Iraq. We did not choose this war. Saddam Hussein was given a choice by the international community. Give up your weapons of mass murder or lose power. He chose unwisely, and now he will lose both. As in Afghanistan, our objective in Iraq is not conquest or colonization. Iraq belongs to the Iraqi people. Our objective is to bring down a regime that threatens the American people with weapons of mass destruction and create conditions where Iraqis can establish a new government, one that respects the rights of its diverse population and the aspirations of all Iraqis to live in freedom and to choose their own leaders. To American forces and those of our coalition partners, let me say this. Know that we are proud of you, that we stand with you today. We have every confidence in your courage, your tenacity, and your ability to get this job done. All Americans hold you and your families in our thoughts and prayers today. General Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I, too, want to extend my deepest condolences to the families of the Marines, both U.S. and our British allies, who died in the helicopter crash yesterday, and to the family of the Marine killed in action earlier this morning. These brave men died fighting for their nation and the safety of the world. Operation Iraqi Freedom, our effort to disarm Iraq and dismantle the Iraqi regime, is fully underway. But before I go into that, I want to recap what has happened in the last 48 hours and how we got to where we are now. On Wednesday afternoon, we conducted early battlefield preparations by taking out air defense threats, radar, communication sites, and artillery that could pose a threat to coalition forces. Some of these targets included radars in western Iraq and near Basra in southern Iraq, artillery pieces near the Al-Fal and Al-Zabar near Kuwait, and surface-to-surface missiles in the south. Later Wednesday evening, coalition forces began inserting special operations forces throughout western and southern Iraq to conduct reconnaissance operations and take down visual observation posts on the southern Iraqi border. At the same time, as we briefed yesterday, we took advantage of a leadership target of opportunity in Baghdad. Specifically, we struck at one of the residences in southeastern Baghdad where we thought the leadership was congregated. We also took down, struck intelligence service headquarters in Baghdad and a Republican Guard facility. They were targeted with nearly 40 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles from coalition ships in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. 2 Air Force F-117s also dropped precision-guided 2,000-pound penetration weapons on these leadership targets. Then yesterday, we launched more than 20 TLAMs against 8 targets in Baghdad, which included several Baghdad Special Security Organization sites. And as most of you know, the Special Security Organization is that organization that protects the senior Iraqi leadership. Also on Thursday, coalition ships launched some 10 TLAMs against 3 Republican Guard targets in Kirkuk in the north. In the last 24 hours, Special Forces have seized an airfield in western Iraq and have secured border positions in several key locations. Additionally, Navy SEALs and coalition special forces have seized Iraq's 2 major gas and oil terminals in the northern Persian Gulf. There were embedded media with the SEALs, and their reports should be out shortly. I also have a graphic, I think, as they'll bring it up, and it's up now. Good. Coalition ships boarded 3 Iraqi tugboats in the Khor Abdallah waterway and found weapons, uniforms, and mines. Over 130 mines, including influence mines, were discovered. Our naval vessels are being extra vigilant to ensure the Iraqi Navy has not placed any mines in international waters. On the ground, as you know, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, along with our coalition partners, crossed into Iraq, and they have now secured the port city of Qasr and the Al Faw Peninsula. They have also secured the main oil manifolds along the Al Faw waterways and have moved through the southern Iraqi oil fields. These fields, if we're successful, should be secured sometime later today. And they will be a great resource for the Iraqi people as they build a free society. Last night at approximately 10 p.m. Eastern Time, the rest of the ground campaign began in earnest when the 3rd Infantry Division rolled into southern Iraq. There's been a lot of reporting on this, of course, with some of the embedded media. At this hour, our ground forces have pushed close to 100 miles inside Iraq. Since Operation Iraqi Freedom began, coalition aircraft have flown more than 1,000 sorties and dropped scores of precision-guided munitions on Iraqi military targets. I have 2 gun camera shots from yesterday. Both are from F-14s as they dropped on missile targets in southern Iraq. The first is targeting a missile support vehicle. The second is an Iraqi missile storage facility in Basra. And if you note in the bottom of that picture, you'll see another fire that was hit from a previous strike from the same flight. As you've seen from the TV coverage from embedded media, clearly we're moving towards our objectives. But we must not get too comfortable. We're basically on our plan and moving towards Baghdad, but there are still many unknowns out there. We have dropped millions of leaflets over Iraq telling the Iraqi people our intentions and asking the Iraqi military to lay down their arms. In fact, some Iraqi soldiers are surrendering and abandoning their positions in the south and also in the north. Clearly, many Iraqi military are heeding our message that it is better to fight for the future of Iraq than to fight for Saddam Hussein. That brings us up to date. So now within the last hour, coalition forces have launched a massive air campaign throughout Iraq. Several hundred military targets will be hit over the coming hours. But we're getting into future operations here, and I'm going to let those details be briefed by CENTCOM tomorrow. Finally, I have 2 messages. First, to the commanders and soldiers of the Iraqi forces, I urge you in the strongest possible terms, do the honorable thing, stop fighting, that you may live to enjoy a free Iraq where you and your children can grow and prosper. The second message to the men and women of our armed forces and to our allies and our coalition partners and to all their families, I salute you for your sacrifice, your courage, and your professionalism. Be confident that you are well prepared, well trained, and well supported in the mission that lies ahead. Take pride in the legitimacy and the necessity of your mission. Show compassion for the lives that this war will forever change, but rest assured the outcome is not in doubt. We will disarm the Iraqi regime and ensure their weapons of mass destruction will not fall into the hands of terrorists. And with that, we'll take your questions.
Before we do, let me make one comment. Just before coming down, after the air campaign began in earnest about 1 o'clock, I saw some of the images on television, and I heard various commentators expansively comparing what's taking place in Iraq today to some of the more famous bombing campaigns of World War II. There is no comparison. The weapons that are being used today have a degree of precision that no one ever dreamt of in a prior conflict. They didn't exist. And it's not a handful of weapons, it's the overwhelming majority of the weapons that have that precision. The targeting capabilities and the care that goes into targeting to see that the precise targets are struck and that other targets are not struck is as impressive as anything anyone could see. The care that goes into it, the humanity that goes into it, to see that military targets are destroyed, to be sure, but that it's done in a way and in a manner and in a direction and with a weapon that is appropriate to that very particularized target. And I think that the comparison is unfortunate and inaccurate. And I think that will be found to be the case when ground truth is achieved. I would add also that I think we're probably watching something that is somewhat historic. We're having a conflict at a time in our history when we have 24 hours a day television, radio, media, internet, and more people in the world have access to what is taking place. You couple that with the hundreds, literally hundreds of people in the free press, the international press, the press of the United States, from every aspect of the media, who have been offered and accepted an opportunity to join and be connected directly with practically every aspect of this campaign. And what we are seeing is not the war in Iraq. What we're seeing are slices of the war in Iraq. We're seeing that particularized perspective that that reporter or that commentator or that television camera happens to be able to see at that moment. And it is not what's taking place. What you see is taking place, to be sure, but it is one slice, and it is the totality of that that is what this war is about and being made up of. And I doubt that in a conflict of this type there's ever been the degree of free press coverage as you are witnessing in this instance. Sir.
Mr. Secretary, it's obvious from the beginning of this major air campaign and from what you all have said that there's been no general agreement by the Iraqi military leadership for a general surrender.
That's for sure.
Could I ask, sir, are there talks, possibly direct talks going on between this building and the Iraqi senior military leadership toward that end, possibly?
In the way you've put it, the answer is no. If you're thinking, is there country-to-country dialogue taking place? And the answer is no. If you're asking, is there contact between the coalition forces and Iraqi forces, the answer is most certainly. There has been over the past period of weeks, and those discussions have intensified, but they tend to be particularized to a specific unit in a specific location.
So in terms of any general surrender, they're not, you wouldn't say that there were talks going on at high levels?
I answered that. The answer is no.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe Saddam Hussein is currently in control of Iraq?
I don't know.
Do you have any indication that the leadership has changed hands?
I hear scraps of information, and you can be certain if I had a sufficient number of scraps that it began to make a persuasive case, that I would opine on it.
Can you characterize the command and control structure that you believe is in place currently inside Baghdad?
Until there's good, solid evidence that it doesn't exist, we have to assume that it is in place and functioning in one way or another. Our hope, our expectation is that they probably had multiple methods of communicating through their command and control system. They had redundant systems. And so to the extent we are successful in eliminating some, our expectation is that even if it's simply couriers, they will have the ability to communicate. I think it's a stretch to think it's possible to eliminate their ability to communicate up and down through their command system. Our hope and our prayer is not that we'll get 100% of their ability to communicate, but rather that we will be persuasive enough with the people who would have to implement the orders of the senior people in that regime and persuade them that it is clearly not in their interest to obey those types of orders.
Can you help us to clarify here, the type of people that you are in contact with represent what? Republican Guard and regular Army outside of Baghdad? Are you in touch with any of those inside, which is where his key levels of support are?
For the most part, it's outside.
And is that
Could you elaborate as much as you possibly can about the fate of Saddam Hussein and what you know so far about the success of the strike on the command headquarters?
There's no question but that the strike on that leadership headquarters was successful. We have photographs of what took place. The question is, what was in there? And until we gather sufficient information and intelligence and have more than one source that gives us conviction, we have to assume that the operation is proceeding.
Do you have one source that might have perhaps seen him coming out?
I don't want to get into that.
Mr. Secretary, if Saddam Hussein and his sons were listening to this briefing and they wanted to give up, what precisely should they do? And is it, now that the air campaign over Baghdad has begun, is it in fact too late for them to choose to go into exile? Is their only choice to be captured, surrender to the United States, or be killed? Is it too late for exile?
It is certainly too late for them to stay in power. What they do with themselves is up to them, and what the people around them do with them is up to the people around them. But you know, I guess time will tell what kinds of judgments they'll make. So far, they've made very poor judgments.
What precisely?
Oh, I don't need to give advice to that. They know precisely what to do.
General, have you, of course? You mentioned earlier the allusions to bombing campaigns in World War II, and that's an inappropriate historical analogy.
Those were dumb bombs, and they were spread across large areas.
Finish my point.
These are very precise weapons.
But one thing that characterized those campaigns and the bombing of Hanoi was that the public, their spirit did not diminish. They hunkered down and they pretty much resisted the bombing. What makes you so certain that in this case, even though it's precise, that shock and awe won't just force the Iraqis to hunker down and wait it out, like the Brits, the Germans, the Vietnamese, and the Japanese in World War II and in Vietnam?
Well, for one thing, the people here are a repressed people. Anyone there, I think, while it has to be a terribly unpleasant circumstance, will have an opportunity to see the precision with which we're going about this task, and that the targets are military targets, and that this is not an attack on the Iraqi people. It's not an attack on the country of Iraq. It's an attack on that regime that has refused to disarm peacefully. Yes.
Can I just add to that? The Secretary is absolutely right. This is about their military capability, and we have the capability in a reasonably precise way to go after those military targets. They're going to diminish their capability over time. And so we think that, combined with what other things you see going on, I think I mentioned in my remarks, the folks that have entered in southern Iraq, we have folks in western Iraq, we have folks in the north, their sights are set on other objectives. They're not going to stay where they are, so this is a combined issue. We're not counting on just the air piece.
You mentioned in your opening statement that you're moving along towards your objective, and some of the embeds are reporting that their units have reached places before they thought they would. Is this 100 miles what you expected? Would you say things are going faster than you thought?
I would let the combatant commander characterize that. When I said that, I meant in the general sense of the overall plan. We knew that, I mean, if they had used chemical weapons at this point, that would have affected the timing and so forth. But the thing that you saw Wednesday night with the quick strike on a leadership target, very well coordinated between all elements of this government and all elements of our U.S. Armed Forces on very short notice, is the kind of thing I think you can expect to see as this conflict unfolds. We have much greater flexibility and adaptability today, not as much as we would like, but a lot more than we've ever had in a previous conflict. So whether it goes faster or slower, we'll be able to adapt.
To go back to the last question for a minute. it's important to remember that this attack is against a regime that is responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people. This is not a benign regime. This is a regime that has killed hundreds of thousands of human beings. Makes a practice of it. Just a second.
Along those lines, though, doesn't it make it more likely there'll be civilian casualties if you're going after hundreds of military targets, even though you have precision weapons? And I think a lot of people would say in this country, and particularly in Baghdad, why not make it more targeted bombing against particular sites as opposed to hundreds of sites?
What is taking place today is as targeted an air campaign as has ever existed.
But it makes it more likely to be civilian casualties, isn't that right? If you're talking
we have analyzed it. Every single target has been analyzed, and the weapon has been carefully selected, and the direction in which the weapon is delivered has been carefully examined, and the time of day when there is the greatest prospect of minimizing any innocent lives. It is an enormously impressive effort, a humane effort, to do what is necessary to reduce this threat against our country and that region, and to eliminate a regime that has killed hundreds of thousands of human beings.
General Myers, Secretary, why do you think Saddam Hussein has not used chemical or biological weapons, and do you think that the strike Wednesday on the leadership target played any role in that?
Don't know. Yes, Pam?
Myers, you mentioned in your brief summary of the war actions to date what is happening in southern Iraq. Can you tell us what U.S. and coalition forces may be doing in the northern part of the country, and to what extent the Turks may have crossed the border?
Best that I know, the Turkish forces have not crossed the border from Turkey into northern Iraq. And in terms of the operations up there, we haven't said a lot about them, and I'd prefer to leave that either to CENTCOM or just not to talk about them right now.
Just one second. I think it should be added that the Turkish forces go in and out of the northern part of Iraq and have for years, and they may have some forces.
In fact, they have had some forces in northern Iraq for some time, not associated with what's going on right now.
But in terms of any large numbers, they are not.
You've repeatedly emphasized the importance of oil. Yes.
Thank you.
Secretary. Secretary, can you characterize the level of resistance coalition forces are feeling, and is there a relationship between resistance and the decision to go ahead with a massive air campaign?
The decision to go ahead with the ground campaign and the air campaign was a direct result of the fact that the 48-hour ultimatum expired and the Saddam Hussein and his crowd did not leave the country. It is after still additional time, in the hope that one might find a large number of senior military people making a conscious decision that they would prefer to act with honor and separate themselves from that regime. When that did not happen, the only choice one has is to proceed and use coercion. It was the absolute last choice after every single other thing that could be done had been done.
So, Mr. Secretary, is a second deadline issued then for the senior Iraqi official to surrender by a certain time?
No, there was no certain time. There was time provided, as you are well aware. The President spoke, I believe, and gave a 48-hour ultimatum on Monday, Eastern Standard Time, 8:14. It came out of his mouth. By Wednesday, 48 hours had expired. Today is, Friday. The ground campaign began last evening, about 10 o'clock, and the air campaign began today about 1 o'clock. We have been issuing through a variety of methods, communications urging the Iraqi military to surrender. And it apparently, what we have done thus far has not been sufficiently persuasive that they would have done that. It may very well be that with the initiation of the ground war last evening and the initiation of the air war this afternoon, that we may find people responding and surrendering.
General Myers, could you say whether there's been any resistance, how much resistance there's been, whether there have been any major engagements, and what the situation is around Basra?
I think if you're in a firefight, it's probably major to you. So we've had the sporadic resistance, and as you know, we had a Marine killed. There may be others that I'm not aware of now, as information lags our timeline. But it's sporadic resistance. There have been tank battles, generally limited, but there have been some fighting.
Mr. Secretary, you used the term free Iraqi forces the other day. Aside from any communications that you have, are there indications that some Iraqi units have turned against the pro-Saddam forces, or are there other forces in the north that may be outside the coalition fighting against Saddam?
To my knowledge, you could not answer that question the way you phrased it, yes. There are forces that have surrendered. There are forces that have had discussions about the possibility of helping. But to my knowledge, there are none that have turned in quite the way you're describing it.
How many have surrendered? Any rough idea?
It's untidy. We get mixed reports from different places, and I wouldn't want to start adding them up. Well, just off the top of my head, I can think of a few hundred.
I think a few hundred, and then in defections, though, you don't know, but there's lots of reports of defections as well.
A lot of people just leave and melt into the countryside.
General Myers?
Yes, you and other officials in this government, of course, said before this many times that flatly that Iraq did have biological and chemical weapons. We also heard from several commanders that they were actually convinced that Saddam, in the last resort, would use those weapons. In these 40 to 48 hours, have you learned anything in addition about that capability, about where they might be, and about the readiness of Saddam and his commanders to use them?
Nothing definitive.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. General Myers, Mr. Secretary, could you please...
There have been a variety of views offered on that subject, and a lot of them tend to cluster around the idea that the most serious period would be if the Iraqi regime did not flee and the forces got close to where they likely are in Baghdad or Tikrit, and the closer they got, the greater the danger of that. We don't, that's been more a theory on the part of outsiders rather than a theory on the part of insiders through interrogation or communications.
General Myers, could you elaborate on the mines that were found? Were the Iraqis engaged in an effort to lay those mines down? Was there resistance? Can you tell us anything more about that?
I don't know about the resistance part. I just know, I think I said the number was, over 130, I believe, mines. Some of those influence mines, meaning they're not just contact, they can detect passing ships and so forth. And there were three boats, and they had uniforms on the boats as well. It's one of the things that General Franks has prepared for, was to be looking out for mines in the Gulf. You remember in the Desert Storm, there were mines in the Gulf, and it was a...
Was this in Iraqi waters, or was it...
It was right up there. It was, yeah, I had it on the diagram, but it was right up there along the rocky waters, basically.
General Myers, how is the deadlock with Turkey affecting the campaign? How is the deadlock with Turkey affecting the campaign over actually being able to get the overflight rights that we need?
Well, we've said a couple of times from up here that that we have forces in the north now. General Franks intends to put more forces into the north. It'd be helpful if Turkey would go along and make the arrangements that the Parliament approved, and that is for overflight. So we're still hoping for that, but we're not counting on that. And we have other ways of inserting those forces.
General Myers, it's clear that you are in the process.
And we're in the process of utilizing the other ways.
General Frank, excuse me, are you moving to protect the oil fields around Kirkuk? General Frank, you said you didn't want to go into detail, but are you moving to protect the oil fields? You all have emphasized the importance of oil.
we've said that the oil is the Iraqis' people's oil. It's a part of the wealth of their country. It would be a crime to destroy those fields. We've had lots of intelligence that suggested that explosives were being moved into those areas and that there was a risk that the Iraqi regime would do what they did to the Kuwaiti oil fields, and that it was an environmental disaster. We, as General Myers said, have control over a non-trivial fraction of the oil wells in the south. And we're fortunate to say that because of the speed with which that was done, there looks to be only about 10 wells that we know of out of possibly 1,000 in that area that have been damaged. Several are still on fire. Several are pouring oil onto the ground. We would intend to, in fairly short order, have the people that know how to repair those wells in there and putting the fires out and fixing the ones that are still spilling on the ground.
Mr. Secretary, could you please for a moment talk about the use of the Predator in this campaign and whether or not you've been able to glean any valuable information from the use of the Predator? Maybe General Myers could comment on that also.
We're using the Predator and it's helpful.
Mr. Secretary, could you please tell me has it been really invaluable in terms of gleaning information that you can use to promote the campaign?
It's an intelligence gathering platform, and we use it along with dozens of other platforms, and they're all helpful.
General Myers. Charlie's question. Are you moving to secure the fields in the north, sir, given these fears that they might set them on fire?
That gets into some operational considerations that we just can't get into right now.
General Myers, on the air campaign, that began after the ground campaign, which was a reversal of the first Gulf War.
That's correct.
Can you talk a little about the conditions that enabled that to happen and what the advantages were of doing it that way? For instance, did the firing in the no-fly zone in the south clear out the opposition needed to pull in those ground forces?
That was a judgment that General Franks made after consultations with the Secretary. There were, of course, certain objectives in the South that were important. One of them we just talked about, the oil fields. If you remember, the fires in the oil fields started before the ground forces went. And so General Franks had to make a calculation on when he wanted to do what he wanted to do. And that's just one of the reasons. There are a couple of other reasons as well. There were some threats, as you know, being moved into southern Iraq, artillery, short-range surface-to-surface missiles, and felt this was the best way to do it.
General Myers.
The fact pattern is different. It's a decade plus later. The circumstance of the Iraqi forces are quite different. The capabilities of the United States of America are quite different. I think that expecting that you're going to find a cookie mold fit between two events that are so substantially different and separated in time by such a long period of time and so many advances in technologies and a notably different purpose. The purpose then was to remove them from Kuwait. The purpose now is quite different. Way in the back.
Over here, it seems to me that we're moving relatively freely toward Baghdad. General Myers talked about we're 100 miles inside. There's reports of surrenders. And then with the attack on Wednesday that we degraded Saddam's capability of communicating with his commanders. Yet we keep talking about this overwhelming force that we're prepared to use. I'm wondering, are you concerned at all that we will be seen as a bully?
The United States and the coalition forces have taken every conceivable step, diplomatic, economic, and ultimatum, and a careful, measured beginning. What we are currently doing could not, by any stretch of the imagination, fit what you just said. It would be it would be to misunderstand everything that's taking place.
General Myers, there had been some concern that the Iraqis might try to use controlled floods or even sabotage of its dams or reservoirs to impede an advance from the south. Is there any evidence of that? And what's being done to try and secure those dams and reservoirs?
To my knowledge, there is no evidence to date of that. We have taken some actions to help mitigate that. I'm not going to go into what they are, of course. And I think, as we've told you before, well, I'll just leave it there. We're just not going to go into the operations.
Pam, last question.
Could you describe the command relationship U.S. Navy Special Forces have with the Kurdish and the Iraqi opposition forces in the north? Is it positive control? Or are they embedded with them and advising them on what to do? And is the United States asking Turkey not to send troops in beyond that refugee buffer zone? And if so, why not? Why?
You get it.
We have special forces and units connected to Kurdish forces in the north, in answer to your question. And you can be certain that we have advised the Turkish government and the Turkish armed forces that it would be notably unhelpful if they went into the north in large numbers.
Isn't that complicating? Isn't that the issue that's complicating the overflight rights? It's that request that the United States has made that's now making Turkey say, well, then you can't fly through our airspace?
There apparently were a lot of issues involved, and that may very well be one of them, but over a period of, 3 or 4 months now that these discussions have been going on, my impression is that the discussions are pretty much towards an end.
And is the Fourth ID out of this fight, at least from Turkey in the north?
That's up to Tom Franks, and he'll make judgments about that in good time, and I guess time will tell how many forces will actually be needed on the ground, but there are other ways to bring them in than Turkey.
Have you found any studs? How long will this war last?
And that's it. The Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Richard Myers ending a briefing in which the Defense Secretary said flatly that the Iraqi regime is starting to lose control. They also confirmed that U.S. ground forces are not only in southern Iraq right now, they've also moved into positions in northern Iraq as well as in western Iraq. Western Iraq significant. That's where Scuds were launched against Israel 12 years ago during the first Gulf War. Didn't provide any details on that. But what General Myers did say was very significant, especially in the aftermath of those huge bombing explosions we saw in Baghdad over the past hour and a half or so. General Myers saying flatly, and I'll read it, quote, he said several hundred military targets will be hit in the coming hours, meaning the air campaign. A-Day, shock and awe, as it's being called by Pentagon officials, is just only starting. Kelly McGann, our security analyst, a retired U.S. Marine, is standing by with some analysis. As the U.S. troops, the Marines especially, move into southern Iraq, the Pentagon now says, Kelly, that they're about 100 miles or so into southern Iraq. They're moving along speedily. What does that say to you?
If you do your time distance planning, Wolf, and you look at the speed of the vehicles and how far they could be, it suggests that there could be intermediary targets. It suggests force protection. It suggests using their reconnaissance and surveillance assets well ahead of them. It suggests that they are moving as quickly as safety and the attainment of their objective would allow.
The dangers, though, for those Marines, the U.S. Army forces, the ground forces that are moving in with an extensive contingent of British forces, the dangers are significant. The greater the danger is, presumably, as they get closer to Baghdad, unless the Iraqi army and the Iraqi leadership simply crumble.
There's no question. Remember that special operations really fall into 3 categories: those that have strategic implications, those that have operational implications, and then in the final analysis, those that have tactical implications. Certainly, it has been weeks that the Special Forces operators have been in country, if not months, in order to start influencing those strategic decisions that had to be made for planning. Now, we just heard in the presser that SOF was dropped along the border, and that was for, tactical reconnaissance and perhaps operational level kinds of assistance, where they're making ready and reporting last minute on accessibility through axis of advances, etc., giving enemy strengths, enemy movements, confirming threat analysis and stuff like that. But suffice to say, Wolf, there's been operations in that country for quite some time now.
Now, when you say SOF, that means Special Operations Forces that have moved into the western part of Iraq. We saw that on that map that the Pentagon just showed, as well as the northern part of Iraq, certainly in the southern part of Iraq, although in the southern part of Iraq, infantry, heavy armor moving in rather rapidly together with Marines, a little bit lighter armor as well. When the general says, General Myers, that there's sporadic resistance, we know 2 U.S. Marines have already been killed in combat. What does that say to you, sporadic resistance?
Well, remember that 3 months ago, the Iraqi Ministry of Defense actually came out and he announced that we would have no resistance in the desert. He said there's nothing of tactical or strategic value in the desert. So he said, we'll see you in the city. In fact, the speed of movement and then sporadic kind of resistance in those small areas of tactical and operational importance, the foothold by the port, getting into the Fa Peninsula, being able to control those areas, that's, I think, what he's indicating.
Kelly McGann, stand by. We're going to be getting back to you to further assess what's happening on the ground, especially with those Special Operations Forces, the Marines moving in. Kelly McGann, a former Marine himself, retired from the U.S. Marine Corps. Miles O'Brien is standing by at the CNN Center in Atlanta for some further analysis of what's unfolding in the skies as well as the ground of Iraq. Miles?
Wolf, watching these pictures as a layperson, it's very difficult to tell exactly what's going on. There's several things to consider. First of all, precisely what the targeting is all about. Through the blinders of television, that kind of straw vision that General Shepard was talking about, we want to give you a sense of exactly what part of Baghdad we're seeing. But before we do that, let's go through some of these pictures with the help of General Don Shepard and General Wesley Clark, both from retired Air Force and Army respectively, and sort of analyze what's going on in each of these cases. General Shepard, I want to begin with you, and we're going to play some tape here, and let's go through the tape and as best you can, give us a sense of what sort of armament, what sort of weapons platform was used, which is to say what sort of aircraft. Now here, look at these first shots here. When you see bright flashes like that, what does that tell you?
Well, you can't tell what type of airplane is dropping it. However, when I see a string of bombs like that, it means from a single aircraft, probably a B-2 would be a good guess, dropping, and most likely JDAMs or Joint Direct Attack Munitions, the satellite-guided weapons against specific targets, Miles.
All right, and when you say that, when you say a string, what you're talking about is seeing, sort of a series of explosions like that across the screen there?
Indeed. When you see one right after the other, bam, 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 in a line, that would indicate that one aircraft. Now, these weapons, once they're dropped, can be steered to different targets. They don't have to be in a line. But again, this is not carpet bombing. These are bombs dropped by one aircraft, it's apparent to me.
All right, let's look at some of these little flashes up here. The flashes that I'm trying to circle with the telestrator, if you could put the telestrator through on the those flashes are for anti-aircraft fire. That is, the Iraqis attempting to somehow go after these aircraft. Wes Clark, can you tell by looking at the trajectory of these at all whether they have any sort of radar lock or any sort of sense? Are they just simply firing away blindly?
It looks to us, as we're here looking at this, that they are firing blindly, because you don't see any sign of tracking of the fire across the sky. There's no indication they actually can see the aircraft. There's no telling what altitude those rounds are exploding at up in the air. It looks like sort of medium caliber anti-aircraft fire to me, 37 millimeter, 57 millimeter fire. And that's the kind of stuff that I think Don Shepard said earlier. It's just standard procedure. You just point at a sector in the sky when you get the warning and you fire your quota of ammunition in that direction.
All right, I'd like to take us down and get some quick satellite imagery through the help of our friends at earthviewer.com and Digital Globe. Wide shot of Baghdad, and let's bring you down first of all to the Ministry of Information. The reason I'm bringing you down there is that is where this camera is located. We're seeing these pictures coming from the Ministry of Information, not far from the Tigris River. There you see it there. On the top of it, some satellite dishes. That's where that camera is. Now let's swing around and give you a sense of which direction those cameras are focused. They're headed, General Don Shepard, right toward that presidential palace complex. And to call it just a palace is a bit of a euphemism. It's a good hunk of Baghdad there with this huge palace at the center. And the palace is obviously a specific regime target. Go ahead, General Shepard.
Indeed. This is a military complex and a governmental complex on the western bank of the Tigris River, well defined in downtown Baghdad. The palace itself is a command and control target. We know there are bunkers underneath that target, and we know basically that not only in the palace but other areas that there are specific areas that we wanted to hit with precision weapons so that we didn't cause collateral damage in downtown Baghdad in populated areas, but rather confined it to valid military targets.
This palace area, in addition to that huge palace, which I just showed you in the middle, includes barracks for the Republican Guard, the Special Republican Guard, all that sort of thing. There's that main palace. Pretty much this whole section is what you call the presidential palace. It's really just a huge Saddam Hussein complex of the regime. Who knows what sorts of buildings are in there, but most of what we have been seeing from these pictures, about 1.75 miles away from the information ministry, those explosions occurring in that area. Right, General Clark?
That's right. And what they're doing is they're going after the buildings and facilities that they've identified that they know have some contribution to the Iraqi military machine. And even if the Iraqis have evacuated some of these facilities or have gone somewhere else, some of the bombs they've dropped are probably bunker busting bombs. They're going underneath the basements and going down into the bunkers below. And this adds to the general disorganization and confusion in the Iraqi armed forces because you're driving people away from their base areas.
As we've been talking, I took you back over to that information ministry. I just want to take you over there one more time and give you a sense of the distance here. About 1.75 miles away, as I told you, using our Earth viewer technology, digital globe imagery. What I want to point out is how much we aren't seeing, and I guess that's worth underscoring here, isn't it, General Shepard?
It is indeed. Again, you're looking through this soda straw. You don't see what's happening elsewhere over the country. Many other targets being hit. I do want to point out one thing. The report of the leadership decapitation target yesterday was evidently a residence somewhere in the Baghdad area, not in this particular complex as the inference I drew. I haven't seen it plotted on a map. But this, what we saw here is going on widely across the country. And I'll point out one other thing. General Myers said in his briefing this was from 1,000 strikes. On a typical day during the Gulf War, we launched around 2,500 strikes. So this is a microcosm of what the military coalition is capable of doing should they choose to do so, Miles.
All right, I have highlighted it. That is the key point there, that presidential palace. Where much of the focus of all of this is. You get the sense from looking at these pictures, you know, that Baghdad is in flames. We wish to underscore for our viewers that what we are seeing probably is focused really on this sprawling palace compound that I've pointed out here in this section of Baghdad. Once again, don't let the blinders of television fool you. General Clark, you want to underscore that point for us?
Well, I do, because actually we know that the Iraqis built these palaces with a lot of underground facilities in them. They brought in European engineers, did European designs. Some of them were from Yugoslavia. This stuff was designed to withstand conventional military combat. It was designed in some cases to withstand earthquakes. There are tunnels connecting buildings in here. So this is a fortified military area. Don't be fooled by the trees in the plot. It is not a populated area. This is a military area. It's one of the nerve centers of the Iraqi command and control system. And what you're seeing in the strikes tonight is the real first step. It's sort of surgically taking out piece by piece their command and control facilities.
All right, Generals Clark and General Shepard, as we continue on, we're having a few glitches with our satellite imagery there from earthviewer.com. I'll probably leave it there before the computer gods look not so well upon me. We appreciate your insights, General Shepard, General Clark, giving us sort of the lay of the land in Baghdad. Wolf?
Miles, before I let all of you go, a quick question. We're standing by, first of all, for the White House press briefing that's about to begin. So if you could answer this question, perhaps General Clark or General Shepard, very briefly. When General Myers says several hundred military targets will be hit in the coming hours, he didn't say days or weeks, he said hours. General Shepard, what does that say to you?
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Don.
Well, it basically says we have the capability to do that if General Franks decides to do it. So we basically are withholding that capability, but it's also going to be done across the country, not just in downtown Baghdad. So
let me just follow up on that, because we've been watching through this camera in Baghdad, and it hasn't shown anything more. That doesn't mean that lots of other places aren't being struck. Baghdad is the center of the air defense network. A lot of the air defense facilities were moved into the Baghdad area, so it makes it a much tougher target to go at, or more risk, and so it's easier to take apart these other facilities, and that's what we'll be doing.
All right, General, stand by for 1 second. We're seeing more activity now in Baghdad. When General Myers said several hundred more military targets would be hit in the coming hours, it looks like some of them may be hit right now. You could probably see on your own screen what's going on. What does it look like to you, General Clark?
Looks like to me the Iraqis have picked up indications of another pulse of aircraft coming in, and they're putting up their standard protective barrage with people firing in pre-designated sector areas, hoping that an aircraft will fly through the flak or the shell.
And General Shepard, when they pick that up, the potential U.S. activity, how are they picking that up? What kind of intelligence do they have?
There's all sorts of indications, Wolf. First of all, people can phone in to them that Tomahawks are being launched from ships, so they know about how far those ships are from Baghdad, and so they can time and distance that. Also, you can hear the Tomahawk missiles, and you can also hear the aircraft. So all of those are cues that tell them to start shooting.
All right, stand by for a second, guys. I want to go to the White House. Ari Fleischer, the press secretary, is now briefing reporters. We're going to keep this picture up even as he answers reporters' questions.
Leader Pelosi and Leader DeLay to inform them of the latest situation in the Gulf. The President then taped his radio address, and he has departed for Camp David. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. Helen?
Can you say whether Iraq is the end goal here? Some of the president's advisors have said they thought it would be good to go on to other countries in the region to democratize or liberate. What is it? Can you clarify for the American people?
Who has suggested that?
Pearl, one.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anybody who works for the president who has said that. There may be outside people who have some thoughts.
Iraq is the sole goal.
The president has made repeatedly clear to the American people, as he said in his address to the nation the other night, that the purpose of this is the disarmament of the Iraqi regime. Terry?
Has the president watched any of this, on the unfolding events in Baghdad, do you know?
Now, obviously, the president, having authorized the mission, was aware of the mission, knew when it would begin, etc. And I don't think he needs to watch TV to know what was about to unfold.
Wondering if he had impact.
No, the president's approach is to gather the information about what is happening in its totality. He receives the information from his advisors, people who have a sight on all areas of what is underway. The president is aware of course, the American people as they watch these events unfold, but he gets his information in a totality.
And may I follow up on that? The president has spoken many times of the special burden and the special responsibility he has as commander-in-chief sending young Americans into harm's way. And has he ever spoken of and he's also talked about liberating the Iraqi people from this brutal regime. But have you heard him talk about this other responsibility which may weigh on him heavily today, and that is for the death of innocents, for the Iraqi moms and dads and children who may, despite our best efforts, be killed?
There's no question about that, and I think the president worries about it from 2 points of view. One, in terms of the present mission. This is why the president and the Department of Defense work so carefully, and we have such a modern military that is capable of engaging in precision strikes so that the targets are indeed the military targets. As always in war, there is risk, there will be innocents who are lost, and the president deeply regrets that Saddam Hussein has put innocents in a place where their lives will be lost. The other portion of what the president remembers when he thinks about the innocents are the 3,000 innocents who lost their lives on September 11th in the United States. And if it were not for the worries that the president had about an Iraqi regime in defiance of the United Nations possessing weapons of mass destruction, which he fears could again be used against the United States, you might not see this developing. Campbell?
Just to clarify Terry's question, you said the president doesn't need to watch TV to know what's going on in Iraq, but you're telling me these are pretty astounding images. He doesn't have a television on somewhere? He's not watching what's going on?
The president, again, understands the implications of the actions that he has launched to secure the disarmament of the Iraqi regime and to liberate the people. Campbell, the president may occasionally turn on the TV, but that's not how he gets his news or his information.
I'm not suggesting it is, but we just want to try to
From time to time, he might.
Can I ask on a different subject? There was a humanitarian crisis in Iraq even before the bombing began in terms of food shortages. After the what we saw today, this massive attack on Baghdad, that situation is clearly going to be much, much worse beginning tomorrow. What specifically is the administration planning to do when the sun comes up?
Well, one, that's not necessarily true. The destruction of a palace of Saddam Hussein's or the destruction of a military facility may not have anything to do with the feeding of the Iraqi people. In all cases, the United States is leading the effort, and along with the military come massive waves of humanitarian relief in the form of food, in the form of medicine, in the form of everything that may be necessary to help protect and to feed the Iraqi people. We will see if any of that is indeed necessary to the degree that has been anticipated and planned for. But you should not necessarily leap to that conclusion based on what you saw on TV today.
Just one final question. President Chirac of France said today that he would not support a UN resolution that would give the U.S. and Britain the authority to administer it in Iraq. What's your reaction?
Well, as was said at the statement in the Azores, we will continue to work with the United Nations. The President does believe the United Nations has a role in the future of Iraq and the reconstruction of Iraq. The President would hope that nobody would stand in the way of the humanitarian reconstruction of Iraq. Mark?
All right, Secretary Rumsfeld made mention of the surrender discussions that are going on, and he also made mention of third parties being involved. Is there anything you can tell us about that in terms of what level they're going on?
No, I think Secretary Rumsfeld addressed it. I think you heard him say that much of this is the unit-to-unit type of communication. The President made his message clear in a way that was unequivocal. He gave Saddam Hussein 48 hours to leave the country to avoid military conflict. The President wishes Saddam Hussein had left the country so that this would not have come to pass. Saddam Hussein made his choice.
Speaking of Saddam Hussein, can we just go over the tape one more time and just give us your best read on what the tape tells us and what it does not tell us, and what you know and can tell us about Saddam Hussein's fate?
The tape has been analyzed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and their analysis has led them to believe that the tape is indeed the voice of Saddam Hussein, but no conclusions have been reached about whether it was canned ahead of time or not. There's insufficient information for anybody to draw a conclusion about that.
The larger question, does that tell us anything about where he is, how much control he's got?
No, the fact that Iraq released a tape doesn't tell anybody anything about where Saddam Hussein is or is not.
Can I ask one additional question about Camp David this weekend? The President's going to be spending the weekend there. Can you describe what his plans are for the weekend? Will he be able to keep in touch?
Sure. There'll be a meeting of the National Security Council tomorrow morning. The principals, the Vice President, Secretary Powell, Secretary Rumsfeld, Director Tenet, and others, of course, Dr. Rice, will be joining the President at Camp David for participation in the NSC meeting. So Camp David, as you can imagine, has every modern communication. It's a Marine facility. It has everything that anybody needs. Bill?
Let me first follow on Campbell's question. The resolution that...
I thought you were going to ask about watching TV.
I may. The resolution that the U.S. would propose in the UN would do what? Would turn over the administration of Iraq's oil monies to the UN or to the U.S. and the U.K.?
Well, I think the exact form of any resolution is still a matter of discussion. The exact role of the United Nations is a matter that people have to talk about. Well, it all deals with the Oil for Food program, for example. The Oil for Food program is a program administered through the United Nations. We are in discussions now about the administration. We hope the United Nations will act on the Oil for Food program so that the revenues can continue to go and be used to feed the Iraqi people. That will result from Iraqi oil. That's important. That's a United Nations program.
But would the U.S. and the U.K. control it? Or would the U.S.?
Well, that's a United Nations program, I just said. Oil for Food has a long time been a United Nations program.
The President has been had very limited visibility over the last couple of weeks. He's come and addressed the American people twice. We've seen him once or twice this past week in very carefully regulated sessions where he has chosen not to take questions. Is he deliberately going out of his way to avoid putting his personal stamp on the leadership of this war, perhaps because his father was criticized for personalizing the war with Saddam too much?
No, but I think from the President's point of view, particularly in the early stage, the very onset of a military operation, the President thinks that it is most appropriate to let the Defense Department officials who have direct supervision responsibility for all aspects of the military plan to take the questions, to answer the military operational questions, because they are the most expert in it. The President has spoken out today. He spoke out yesterday. If your question is, when will he take your questions, I assure you he looks forward to doing it. You may have your opportunity soon.
My question really is he trying to avoid becoming too identified with the war?
Bill, I think that the American people will make their judgments about what role the President plays, and I think they understand very clearly that this is a President who has made the decision to disarm Saddam Hussein through the use of force after having tried to do it through the United Nations. They watched that whole discussion play out for the last 6 months. He is the President, he's made his decisions, and the American people are watching it.
Is the President satisfied with the progress thus far in the war?
He is, Steve. The President believes that progress is being made. The President has tremendous confidence in the men and women of our military, in the leadership of the military, and in the plan that has been written to disarm Saddam Hussein's regime and to liberate the people of Iraq. Elizabeth?
The Senate appears ready to pass a budget resolution tonight. Has the President delayed sending up the emergency request for funds for this war until after that resolution passes?
No, it's exactly as I indicated for the last several weeks on it. The President has reviewed various estimates about the possibility, the possible cost of action involving military costs and other costs, and the President has said that at the appropriate time he would send it up, and I think that time is coming, but it's just not here yet.
Can I ask one more question about television? Just a very direct question. Did the President not see the pictures on television this morning, the very dramatic pictures of the bombs and the explosions over Baghdad? He did not see those?
I was with the President just as the operation was beginning at about 1 o'clock, and he was not watching TV at that time. I wasn't with him for the duration of it, so I couldn't answer in all instances about it. I probably shouldn't answer a question like this in this room, but the President does not watch a lot of TV.
No, but they were just very, very dramatic pictures. It's hard to imagine that the President of the United States, who ordered this attack, did not see any evidence of
Elizabeth, I don't know that the President needed to watch TV to understand what it means to authorize military force and to know that the mission has begun, the mission is underway.
So the answer is unclear. We don't know if he saw them.
Well, I just described to you where I was with him, but I wasn't with him for the entire duration of what you all saw on TV. Mike?
All right, how does the administration expect Allied forces to be greeted in Baghdad?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. The President believes, as a result of much of the information that he has heard, that the Iraqi people are yearning to be free and to be liberated. The Iraqi people have lived under a brutal dictatorship led by Saddam Hussein, and the history of mankind shows that people want to be free. And given the chance to throw off a brutal dictator like Saddam Hussein, people will rejoice.
And may I ask if the administration expects the Allied forces to find evidence or remnants of chemical or biological weapons or a reconstituted nuclear program?
Well, there is no question that we have evidence and information that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, biological and chemical particularly. This was the reason that the President felt so strongly that we needed to take military action to disarm Saddam Hussein, since he would not do it himself.